There's one kind of romantic relationship that I wouldn't wish on anyone, and that's the kind that's been made intense by a trauma bond. If you were abused or neglected as a kid, you've probably been through it, and I want to help you make sure it never happens again. So what is a trauma bond? It's another name for a dynamic that's also called intermittent reinforcement, where one person gives intense affection and approval to the other person, and then alternates it with neglect and disapproval and abandonment, or even sometimes abuse. Now, you would think that this kind of emotional on-off torture, just blowing hot and cold to the point of cruelty, would drive away prospective partners, right? I mean, this ugly treatment should signal major danger to anyone who actually wanted to be loved. But that's exactly where people traumatized as kids are vulnerable. And if that's you, you probably recognize right away what I'm talking about, whether you had a name for it when it happened to you or not. And you've already noticed that when someone treated you like this, loving you, then turning cold and betraying you over and over, back, forth, it has this insidious power to hook your mind, to grab onto your heart and keep you obsessed and sad and feeling too messed up to get out. I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people how to spot and heal symptoms of complex trauma, including that blind spot that a lot of us develop around toxic romantic relationships, including trauma bonds. Now, trauma bonding can, in theory, happen to anyone. In warfare, it's a form of psychological manipulation that's used on prisoners of war to break them down and get them to abandon their loyalty to their own cause and to their own self-interest, and instead to become completely dedicated to serving their captors. It's a terrible thing to do to a person because it's playing on deep wiring from infancy. It's a survival tactic to do whatever it takes to stay protected and connected to a parent, even if that parent is abusive. And it's interesting, you know, that you can trip that wire in an adult, that it's still there, because in adulthood, clinging to a destructive relationship is just a pure maladaptation. And it reminds me of the way that mistreated animals stay loyal to abusive owners. It's like an involuntary reflex. When I was 6 years old, I went to a little roadside attraction once where they had chickens in wire cages, and you could put like a dime, that's how long ago it was, you could put a dime in the slot, and an electric current would run through the wires and make the chickens dance. They would jump around. There'd be this little tinny music playing, and it came out of just this little machine attached to their cages. And I'll never forget that. I was totally charmed for the first 5 seconds, and then I asked my brother, like, how do they train chickens to dance? And he explained to me it's an electric shock. And then I realized, like, I had shocked the chickens. I had made it start by putting my little dime in the slot, and then I couldn't make it stop. And it was very traumatic for me, that poor chicken just jumping around in there. So trauma bonding is like a groove in your psyche that can form in your childhood. When a parent, sometimes intentionally, but usually for reasons beyond their control, when they can only give love and attention to you some of the time. And if they're caught up in alcoholism or addiction, it's very common to be super loving one moment and then suddenly they're totally out of it. From your perspective, it's sudden. And they might be rageful, they might be passed out, they might be behaving dangerously. Then they sober up again and they're so sorry and they want to make it up to you. Or they're in some psychological state where that sorry phase never comes. They're just sort of there, there's food, and then there isn't. And a kid learns to hang on to every tiny sign that the parent loves them, every little crumb of praise or attention. And it very easily does long-lasting damage to a kid's emotions and to your self-concept, right? And when you grow up, it shows up as a crazy high tolerance for the same kind of treatment from partners. It shows up as an attraction to unavailable people, as love addiction, as a willingness to stay, and even an inability to leave abusive people, abusive partners. And none of this, it's not like it's fulfilling, it's not like it makes you happy. None of it is happy. None of it is happy. It's a mental hook. It creates a sense of dread about losing the relationship that feels worse than the pain of being in the relationship, and it's completely unrealistic. The fact is, you could leave, but you don't. And there's a compulsion in trauma bonding to keep trying and trying, that if you could just figure out the right words, the right behaviors, the right responses, you could win the love of this hot and cold person and not have to deal with leaving. And then maybe the love would get switched on for good. But of course it never works out like that, right? Now, some of you watching this will have been through a trauma bond relationship with someone very dominating who did this to you. And some of you will have done this to another person, in fact. And it's true that there are people who study these tactics and do them on purpose. But I think the vast majority of the time, it's not anything planned out. It's a dynamic that develops between two people who've been conditioned in the past to have an intense emotional response to abandonment, to high drama. So yes, there could be abuse. And if you're in an abusive relationship, I'm going to tell you flat out to get out of it. But in this video, I'm talking not about abuse per se, but about an unhealthy, unhappy dynamic where one partner isn't reliable or committed or equally into the other, and the result for the other partner is to be hooked. And honestly, this can go two ways. Two people can be hooked in, creating drama and the threat that the relationship is ending periodically, maybe just to get that intense result of things coming back together strongly. So obviously that's a drain. It's very hard on people. But with an abandoner especially, that intense feeling of relief and pleasure that when you're allowed to come back into the arms of the person who abandoned you, it feels like the greatest love of all time. But it's not. It's not actually love. It's a bug in the system. It's not a feature, it's a bug. It's one of your conditioned responses that makes you hold on for dear life when you feel threatened with being alone and rejected. It feels like love, but it's more like the dance of that chicken in the cage that I saw when I was a kid. It's an involuntary response to a yucky stimulus. So in other words, if you get hooked in a trauma bond with someone blowing hot and cold, if that's happened to you, it was involuntary. It's not your fault. And I want you to get out of the shame and self-attack that you've maybe been carrying about these relationships, and there can be a lot of shame. You've been hooked on someone, and all your friends can see the person doesn't treat you well. They tell you to leave. You know they're right on some level, but it feels impossible. But here's why I want you to be strong and to open up to learning some strategies to get free, if that's what you want. Because for people with CPTSD, the more time we spend living on the emotional crumbs on the roller coaster in a trauma bond, the harder it is to change. You'll be driven to try to handle it better when you're in that kind of relationship, but you don't want to get good at handling this lousy treatment. You want to be bad at it. You want to give voice to the part of you that still knows that this is not what you're meant for. This isn't what you want. You were born to be loved. You are designed to thrive when you're safe and accepted and supported, just like when you were a kid. That's what you were meant for. And if you're in a relationship where you don't have those things, then effectively you're blocked from your full development. And so it's so important for you to heal and change that dynamic, either by getting out of that relationship or no longer contributing to the high drama dynamic. Because it takes two to be in a trauma bond. And if you're not literally captive to someone, you're the only one who can change the way that you relate to that other person. It's you. You can start with you. They don't even have to be agreeable to change for you to begin your change. And you don't really know how it's going to turn out. You've got to fight your attachment to the idea that somehow the other person will be the one to make it change, or that someone else will come riding into the view to save you. You're going to save you. That's the first thing to understand. The second thing is to address the void in your life that makes the drama and loneliness of a trauma bond seem like something you'd want at all. And if that's happening for you, I'd wager that you're also suffering from a lack of connection with other people in your life. Maybe you're ashamed of your relationship and you're hiding or keeping people at arm's length so they won't judge you, but you need a friend or two. Everyone does. You need people who you can tell what's really going on, who you can be honest with. Just because you're in a hard relationship doesn't mean you have to leave, doesn't mean you have to be ashamed of not having left. Sometimes just being connected with other people reduces the pressure on the relationship. It reduces the need that you have for that relationship to be everything for you. And sometimes that's enough to produce a positive change in the dynamic. This is especially true when two people who love each other and want to be in a relationship are still trauma bonding to some degree by fighting, going through drama, the acting out the whole thing of it's over and coming back together, and even using those upsets to then trigger the happy reunion, if we can call it that, the removal of the threat of breakup and the restoration of harmony. It's a mini kind of trauma bond in itself. A couple could go their whole life doing this, but if you have CPTSD, it's going to create a constant pull, like backward on your healing progress. It's a constant trigger reactivating your dysregulation and trauma wounds. Peace is a better goal. Connection is a better goal. If you're in a relationship you want to preserve and you both want peace, you can reduce the drama by drawing a hard line against dramatic statements and threats to the future of the relationship. If you ever do need to leave, you'll do it, but there's no need to threaten it or keep talking about it. If you don't threaten the relationship, you're also not going to get the high of that happy reunion, and what's left there is what's going to feel kind of empty. And what goes in that emptiness is a whole bunch of communication, and it takes time. But you can start to strengthen your genuine bond and not have it be so dependent on adrenaline and endorphins to feel real to you. If you're in a relationship where you're actually not loved, though, and you're aware the right thing really is to leave, then getting support from friends to make your transition out as quietly and intentionally and as drama-free as possible will help prevent a re-triggering of the trauma bond. Having friends and practicing your connection makes leaving much more doable. Without friends, it feels unthinkable, right? But with friends, you can envision a life where you're going to be okay. You might say, oh, I don't have friends, but that's often a consequence of being in a high drama relationship. That is something you can start to work on right now. When you've made a friend or two, then you have people to hang out with. You know you won't always be alone. Maybe you even have a place to stay while you sort your life out. Now, a trauma bond is in many ways like a drug addiction, and there will be withdrawal. There are strategies that you can use to exit smoothly and with as little drama and retriggering as possible. And I teach that in my dating and relationships course. I also teach how you can change your patterns and do the work to be ready for something lasting and real in the future. And I'll put a link below so you can check out that course if you like. You can learn to date differently and to be with a different kind of person. You can be conscious next time. You can support yourself in having a happy life next time and have clarity and not fall into your old pattern and not get involved with abusive or unavailable people. Healing is possible. I want you to feel that in your bones. Healing is possible for you. You have a life ahead where you can be safe and loved, and you deserve that. You're meant for it. If you like this topic about how to have better, healthier, more connected relationships across your life, I invite you to stick around on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't. And in particular, you might want to watch this video right here. It's very connected to what we just talked about. And I will see you very soon.